several thousand. There's a doctor in South Africa that used it in 14,000 patients, including many elderly. Not a single one died. You've seen it all over CNN, Rachel Maddow, and she's saying it so passionately. If you take this vaccine, you are not going to get COVID. And calling anyone who questions it being a science denier. I mean, Jesus Christ. Early on in 2020, and predominantly affected the elderly. We've got all of that data now that's been reanalyzed by one of the world's top scientists. And even looking back now, essentially, if you were under 70, even from the beginning, your risk of serious harm from COVID is in the ballpark figure of the flu, right? And even I actually was wrong. I wrote an article in European Scientist in April 2020, because I actually initially started making a lot of noise about why we're not talking about lifestyle with COVID to help people mitigate, improve their immune system. And I said, talking to a friend of mine.
I heard that also from some individuals, like if you had immune system boosters, then you'll be okay. I never took the shot.
Who works in the busiest ER in America, in New York, who I've done work with. And he said, Asim, I've never seen anything like this. This is devastating. Some of my colleagues are dying. So I have no doubt that at the very beginning, in the early strain of the virus, it was really bad, especially for vulnerable people with obesity, etc.
Because even I remember getting COVID. I used to live on the top floor of this building. And I remember I've never experienced anything quite as bizarre as the symptom set that I had when I got COVID. The fact that at 3 a.m. in the morning, I don't take medicine. So the fact at 3 a.m. in the morning, I'm lying flat on my floor ordering ibuprofen on Uber Eats because my back, I just had the most bizarre back pain. And so I was having to lie flat on the floor because I couldn't even lie in bed. It was so bad. And just this weird set of symptoms that I'd never had before. My partner, she lost her smell and taste, and it was so unusual. It was so unusual. There's not been a time.
My wife and my 2 kids had COVID, and I took care of both of them and never caught it.
So when you hear it compared to the flu, you go, this was not the flu. This is something different.
Yes. No, the symptoms are very different. And I think now it's accepted as well. It was human engineered. It almost certainly the evidence points to it being a lab leak, right? So it had you're right. It was very different to any other virus.
That used to be a conspiracy theory.
I know, right?
Now it's not a conspiracy theory.
I know, exactly.
It's funny, when you hear about that lab in Wuhan that were messing around with viruses, and then we decided to put the blame on a market stall. But I think now the general consensus is that it probably came from that lab in Wuhan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I've spoken to, in fact, I spent time with actually the scientist that first went public with it, who identified it, guy in in Australia. That came from a lab. So I think it had these different strange things, loss of smell, etc. But in terms of serious illness, there's so many other components to this. So one is, did we institute the correct treatments? A lot of people were killed because they weren't managed properly in ITU, in terms of putting people, intubating them, putting on respirators when they didn't need it. And that in itself has a risk. Some of the wrong treatments were given. There were other treatments now that we look back that probably would have been helpful. Things like ivermectin.
Here's admitting to these folks fucking experimenting on this.
A bit controversial, but it's very safer than paracetamol, right? So first, do no harm, okay? But it may have done some good, and a lot of people and doctors around the world that used it in several thousand. There's a doctor in South Africa that used it in 14,000 patients, including many elderly. Not a single one died from COVID, and this is early on. So all these things that we missed a lifestyle intervention. So all those things are there. But by the time...
I don't think they missed it. You motherfuckers don't miss shit. Come on, bro. I'm not falling for that shit.
When you get to the end of 2020, the beginning of 2021, there are so many things that happen, Steve, that you have to think about before you introduce a vaccine. One is, what is the state of the virus right now? And it had already mutated to some degree and become less lethal. There is natural immunity, which we know is very powerful, right? But
the news and the government didn't preach about natural immunity. All they did was preach about, hey, you got to take the shot. You got to take the shot. My wife got fired at first for not wanting to take the shot. She wound up taking it eventually, but I won't take that shit. I don't trust the government like that.
But in one group, they get the dummy pill, and you follow them up over 5 years. And in the people that got the dummy pill, in fact, you didn't do anything different. 2 of them suffered a heart attack. In the other group, the other 100 people that were followed up over 5 years, who got the pill, the drug, right? Only 1 suffered a heart attack. So you've reduced the heart attack risk by 50%, right?
Let's be honest, they didn't even do that. They didn't have any clinical trials like that. They just pushed it on people. That's why it was so many. Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and some other ones that didn't make the cut. I can't put my finger on all the names right now, but there were a lot more.
2 to 1, right? 50%. But you've only prevented one heart attack. You've treated 100 people, but you've prevented one heart attack out of treating 100. Yeah? Does that make sense? So that's a 1% absolute benefit. In other words, when you explain that to a patient, when I have engaged in sort of what we call informed consent, shared decision making, when they ask me about drug, I'll say, this gives you a 1% chance if you take this drug religiously of preventing a heart attack. Now, you apply that to the original COVID vaccine trials, which, by the way, have so many other problems with them because even those trials were conducted and analyzed and designed by the drug industry. I mean, this is one of the biggest myths that needs to be busted, Steve, out there for most doctors, as well as members of the public. Medical knowledge is under commercial control, but most people don't know that. So what happens is they did the trial, but let's just talk about what the results, their results showed us. A 95% relative risk reduction against infection. They didn't show any reduction in COVID death, by the way, in that trial, right? They just said prevent from infection, but we then presume it may then prevent, right?
He's admitted to them fooling the fuck out of us. Not him per se, because he would be considered a whistleblower, AKA a snitch. But I praise these people as heroes because they're not afraid to tell truth to power.
The absolute risk reduction from infection at the beginning was 0.84%. 1 in 119. So that's how many people you need to vaccinate to prevent one infection, which actually people were not told. So imagine you're thinking, should I take this vaccine? Say, well, Steve, there's a less than 1% chance that it's going to prevent you getting infected. People weren't told that.
But it then reduced my chance of getting seriously ill, right?
No, but we've then talked about that, haven't we? Like, as in when you look at the data, certainly beginning of 2023, that was looking over the previous year, 2022, you have to vaccinate 2,500 people to prevent one person getting seriously ill with COVID, right? If you're over 70.
With the other strain,
with the other strain, and it may have been better, Steve. You're right. It probably was better, but it's still, numbers are still much smaller than what people were led to believe. And by the way, Steve, the narrative at the beginning, they kept changing the goalposts. Remember, it wasn't about preventing serious illness and death. It was all about preventing infection. You are not.
I be telling people all the time, man, when you're dealing with these type of individuals, they say numbers don't lie. I call bullshit because numbers can be manipulated, especially when you don't have access to the numbers they have. And you see how they misusing them by these percentages they're using, claiming, oh, this was going to work, this was going to work. How the fuck numbers don't lie? When they fooling you and they're using some shit that's not beneficial for you by using numbers.
In America, you've seen it all over CNN, Rachel Maddow, and she's saying it so passionately. If you take this vaccine, you are not going to get COVID. And calling anyone who questions it being a science denier. I mean, Jesus Christ.
So my last question on that before I said what I was going to say is, do you think there would have been less deaths overall if we hadn't have had a vaccine?
Yes.
You think there would have been less deaths?
By now, when you look at it. So I think over time, so where we are now.
Start? So if we hadn't have introduced the vaccine for that first strain of COVID, do you think there'd be less deaths?
Okay. If I was to, I still think that this is very nuanced, but important. If the vaccine had only been offered to the high-risk people at the beginning, say the over 70s or people with multiple risk factors, I think there is a case to be made, right? I'm going to counter that in a minute though, but there is a case to be made that there was overall benefit versus harm. But there's a problem. One, there wasn't true informed consent, right? Because those figures, those numbers weren't given to people about the prevention of infection, etc., right? And two, if you have an average serious harm rate of 1 in 800, any scientist, even regulators would have said, hold on a minute, this is way too high. This is too risky. And this is, by the way, Steve, only the short term, because remember, this vaccine didn't go through what other vaccines have gone through, which is 5 to 10 years of safety testing. So if you throw all those caveats in and use informed consent, I can guarantee you with all of my knowledge, expertise, experience with patients when you engage in these conversations, most of those elderly people will probably have still refused it. But yes, I think there is a case to be made that the benefits may have outweighed the harms in those high-risk people at the very beginning in the short term. Absolutely.